A quote from this seller of this article states, "Do I have regrets about selling the house as is? To be honest, yes." I'll share practical information about as is sales from what I've learned over the last 20 years of helping homeowners like you and give you some insight on the reality of what an as is sale really looks like. This is a great example of a real life seller regretting the choice to sell as is, and it helps to illustrate the advantages and the disadvantages and when it makes sense to do this type of sale. I sold my father's house as is. Here's what I learned. Many homeowners and even real estate professionals are often confused about what as is really means. This part of the article might be one of the best explanations I have seen on what as is means in the real estate transaction from a general point of view. As is not strictly speaking a legal term, rather it's a contractual term. In real estate transactions, it means that the seller makes no guarantees or representations about the property's conditions or the working order of its features and will do nothing to change the condition or features. And crucially, it means that the buyer accepts these terms when purchasing the property. The key phrase here is that it is not a legal term, it's a contractual term. And this means that every contract and transaction will treat as is differently. It is dictated by the terms within the contract, not a universal definition. Most contract terms follow similar language, yet some are more strict and some are less. Some can be a lot more complex if they start referring to other parts of the contract. You want someone who understands how the terms interact with each other, such as areas in a purchase agreement referencing the personal property fixtures, the attorney review, the buyer inspections, the appraisals, and other disclosures. Also understanding the recourse that either party may have if the contract is not performed as agreed. This will be different for every agreement. This is where your local real estate broker or attorney can guide you regarding expectations based on the contract you are working with. And here's the story. The time had come to sell my old Kentucky home. My 90-year-old father had died and had no desire to move back to my birthplace. Built in the French provincial style by my parents in 1963, the house was beautiful with a pool and tennis court surrounded by woods. But it hadn't been updated in 15 years since my mom's death. In his decline, my dad had to let things go. The property was an inherited property, and he hasn't lived in it since he was a child. This is a very common reason for choosing to sell as is. Inherited properties where you may not know any existing issues or you live further away from the property. So it would be challenging to manage the maintenance and any renovations or updates. And if it was vacant, it could pose a risk if someone was not watching over it. So the timing could play an essential role in selling as is versus making updates and renovations. Other types of real estate transactions that are often sold as is along with inherited properties, probates, and estate sales include bank foreclosures, distressed sales such as short sales or pre-foreclosure sales, corporate owned, relocation sales, and occasionally divorce sales. One of the top reasons for selling a home as is the seller lives out of the area, has no knowledge of the condition given they may not have ever lived in there, and in some cases, never even seen it in person. It could be a financial or a time-sensitive limitation for the seller, or the choice of just personal convenience. Sometimes it is as simple as the cost to renovate won't provide a good enough return on the investments if repairs and updates are made due to the location and the extent of the required repairs and possible existing damage to the property. Could be a strong seller's market and the seller has so much leverage due to an imbalance of supply of homes available at that time. Anyone can sell as is, so there's no requirement if you choose to do so. It is just about assessing whether it fits your situation and what your goals are in the end. Spare yourself the expense of renovating and the hassle of negotiating. Friends and real estate pros advised me. They thought people would want the property for the land, a 3-acre lot, and the location. A peaceful suburb only 20 minutes downtown Louisville. So I decided to sell the place in an existing state as is. We listed it at $650,000. After some frivolous nibbles, a serious offer came in $600,000. My broker said take it, but feeling emboldened by my experience in eBay bidding wars, I countered with $625,000. Sold. Well, that was easy, I thought, until the request began. This is where the misunderstanding of as is confuses a lot of homeowners and even some real estate professionals. If you go back to the initial paragraph I pointed out earlier, as is contractual. This is why every transaction differs. It is often believed that as is means buyers will take the home in the condition it was when they first made the offer. The contract most commonly used in my local area, just as a point of reference, as is still allows buyers to complete a home inspection and terminate the contract if they are not satisfied with the condition. So negotiating an as-is contract does not mean you are out of the woods. You still have some obstacles to overcome to get the property to the closing table. Sometimes it can even complicate it further. There are other conditions on many real estate transactions that will directly conflict with an as-is sale that has to be considered when listing your home. I'll get into these in just a little bit. I'd allow the buyers a generous period of time to inspect the property and plan their renovations, but I wasn't prepared for the pop quizzes that follow. Did the septic lines run underneath the tennis court? When was the oil tank last lined? Was the county ever going to run gas lines out to the neighborhood? Each one was accompanied by a follow-up question. If this turns out to be a big expense for us, can you adjust the asking price? Each time I furnished the requested info as best I could while ignoring the hints about the price. Then just 1 week before the scheduled closing, the buyers suddenly got scared the house might have asbestos. Would I pay for a special inspection and removal if it were true? Not basically a threat. Not a hint this time, the sale was off. I panicked. Could I afford not just financially, but emotionally to put the house back on the market, especially since the prime summer selling season was nearly over? But after a careful look at our purchase and sale agreement, sanity returned. Remind these folks of the contractual facts of life, I instructed my broker. They had agreed in writing to buy the home in its current state with no repairs concessions on the seller's part. That was a deal. That is what as is means. If they renege now, I would sue them for breach of contract and probably win, a real estate attorney who looked at the agreement told me. After a tense few days, they finally backed down and the closing went through as planned. I signed remotely, having canceled my flight during my moment of panic. After closing costs, the broker's fees, and paying off the mortgage, I netted a small profit. So the story ended in favor of the seller, yet it's not exactly how he expected it to turn out. It never really is. Do I have regrets about selling the house as is? To be honest, yes. A little. Not so much about the money, I was resigned to getting less. But because it didn't save me as much hassle as I expected. He makes one comment at the end that is important. He understands that selling as is came at the cost of taking less money for the sale. So was the lower price he accepted worth some of the headaches he attempted to avoid? That is a tricky question. So here's everything you need to know to help you decide if selling as is even makes sense for you. Top 5 advantages on why a seller might choose to sell as is. Point number 1, it is convenience. You don't have to deal with the contractors or the quotes or be bothered with making repairs before the closing of the property. The burden falls on the buyer, and if everything goes as planned, it typically doesn't happen until after the property has transferred and the property closes. Not your problem any longer. Point number 2, the time to close can go a lot quicker because you aren't dealing with hassles of repairs and other people's schedules. The timeline can move faster with less of a headache. You might also attract more cash buyers, depending on the condition of the property. This will make more sense later when I get into the potential financing issues with as-is properties. Cash buyers can typically close very quickly since they are not waiting for a financial approval from their lender. And point number 3, there's an argument to be made that there is less liability on an as-is sale. You aren't dealing with inspections and actual repairs directly, as one example where liability can be limited. The relationship a seller has to the property sold as is inherently has less liability, mainly in the cases where the property was never lived in or even visited by that seller. Examples would be inherited properties and foreclosures. It has some nuance and situational. I'll come back to this. It will make a little bit more sense later on. And point number 4 is that there are no upfront costs because you are not dealing with the repairs directly. The costs, the quotes, the inspections, the materials, and the labor for those repairs is not something you need to worry about. Again, most of the time, these are going to be the buyer's burden and happen following the successful closing of the home. And finally, point number 5, no haggling over inspection, repairs, and requests with the buyer. Many contracts will still allow for a buyer to complete an inspection. In a true as-is agreement, it is just to confirm there are no unseen issues, repairs that were not obvious prior to making the offer. The buyer still has a right in some cases to terminate the contract if they are not satisfied. However, the nature of an as-is agreement is if they proceed with the contract, you, the seller, are not responsible for making any of those repairs or providing those credits. Those are the top benefits of selling as is. That is, if the sale ends up actually selling as is. I wish I could say that if the buyer agrees to it at the time of contract, that is just the way it is. Unfortunately, it is not always that easy and can come with more complications than you may anticipate. Here are 5 of the biggest disadvantages of an as-is sale you should know about before making this decision. Point number 1, smaller buyer pool and less interest. I see this often. Right there on the property listing info sheet. This home is being sold as is. The energy and excitement in the buyer's eyes just gets depleted. Doubt sets in. What does this mean? They always ask, even if the house is in good condition. Other questions that arise.
Why? Do they even have the funds to make repairs? Can they even afford to sell it? Do they have negative equity? Is this going to be a short sale? What are they hiding? Are they even serious about selling?
No thanks, next. Often this is a result of misunderstanding, but it does not change the reality that some buyers just don't want to deal with this type of sale. They may even not view the home at all, especially in a time where affordability for some buyers are at an all-time low. Any anticipated extra work would cause a buyer to not even consider it. And point number 2, you will receive lower offers. This goes hand in hand with point number 1. Just the act of listing the home as is will reduce that perceived value for the home to potential buyers, even if there is nothing wrong with it. Offers will possibly come in lower and buyers may be less inclined to negotiate. For the average buyer, emotions play a big role in the terms of perceived value and negotiations. Buyers by nature are skeptical. This is a huge financial decision to make. They want to feel confident that they are not buying a money pit. When buyers view homes as is and see repairs they will have to deal with directly, in their head, the repair costs may be inflated well above what the actual cost will be. Top that off with inconvenience and uncertainty in how extensive the repairs might be. And other factors could influence their decision because of the type of financing they are receiving. We'll go over that in more detail shortly. Now, an as-is sales will often attract investors looking to either buy and hold for a rental or flip the home for profit. While this is not emotional to them, it does mean they have to acquire the property at a discount for them to make the numbers work. There are different varieties of investors, from local mom and pop investors looking to build their retirement portfolio to the large national corporate private equity groups buying up properties nationwide. The range of these offers will depend on the purpose of the investment. And point number 3, as is not always as is. When you sell your home following the accepted contract and assuming the inspection was completed to the satisfaction of the buyer, there are 3 situations where as is not always as is. These may or may not apply to your transaction. It is important to be aware of these potential issues in case they do apply, and so you know what questions to ask your realtor. Situation number 1, if the buyer obtains a loan to purchase the home, there will be an appraisal, and in most cases, an appraiser will visit the home and note any issues on the property's condition. Different loan types like government-insured loans, FHA, VA, and USDA loans, for example, will have stricter requirements based on the condition of the home. Some will even have required inspections to be paid for by the seller, depending on the loan type and location. Even conventional loans, while less picky, some issues can still create problems for the buyer financing to get approved. If they flag any issues, the loan provider, not the buyer, following the appraisal during the underwriting process, will likely require those repairs to be completed before the property can close, whether the home is in as is or not. If they are not completed, they won't give a clear to close on the financing, and this could result in the purchase agreement being terminated, resulting in you having to put the home back on the market and start the whole process all over again. The alternative to not deal with this problem is to consider cash buyers only. Another option is to consider a buyer with rehab loan, which has its own set of challenges. By doing this, you will reduce the buyer pool substantially, which could result in a much lower price in the end. Some properties are in such a bad condition, in those cases, it's something to consider. Your real estate broker can help you determine this. Situation number 2, if a local or city inspection is required, not all areas will have this, but some do. Some of these will have some as-is sale stipulations that will allow you to maintain an as-is sale. Still, others will require repairs to be made prior to closing, regardless of the as-is clause. This could prevent a sale for any buyer, not just the existing one, even cash-only buyers, simply because it's a requirement by the village or the city. There are different types of city inspections, so they will vary widely depending on the location. It's very easy to find out. You just call your local village or city to find out if there are any special inspections required. And situation number 3, is your home in a homeowners association or an HOA? Some of these may have specific requirements around the condition of the property that have to be met. It's not a common issue in my area, but there have been some situations where it has created a problem. You just need to be aware of the compliance issues before selling. If you don't have a copy of your association documents, that is the best resource. My experience is that they won't typically have a required pre-sale inspection for purposes of the sale. However, if they are aware of any compliance issues, this is where they will get you. This is usually found by a routine property management walking the grounds or a complaint from a neighbor. So make nice with your neighbors if you can. An as-is sale doesn't always result in the as-is portion of the agreement being held up. And it's not always the case where the buyer is not in agreement or not honoring the terms. It sometimes involves these other parties outside of the buyer's control. Lean on your real estate broker or attorney who is experienced in your area. They can guide you through these potential issues. And if you deal with it early, it may never be a problem later. If you need a good contact for a realtor in your area, I work with a ton of real estate professionals throughout the country. Send me a quick message. My contact info is below in the description, and I will get you connected with someone who can help make this process easier for you. Point number 4, your home could be on the market for an extended period of time. You might be thinking, but wait, one of the benefits I mentioned earlier was a faster time to close. That is true once you have a contract and a buyer that will honor the terms of the as-is sale. However, prior to finding a buyer for your home, because you have a smaller buyer pool and naturally a lower buyer demand for homes that are move-in ready, or just the stigma of a home listed as is generally has with buyers, it could take more time to find that buyer for the sale. Current local market conditions will generally dictate to what extent that timeline is. And when you add in the carrying costs, including any continued mortgage payments, insurance, taxes, utilities, homeowners association fees, and maintenance, also additional items such as winterizing a vacant property in colder regions, these costs while the home is for sale all could create a larger net loss with longer market times. A true case where time is money. Along with price reductions and timing of seasonal market shifts, the negative results can compound, making the as-is an option less desirable for the purpose of netting the best return. A comment made in the article earlier, for example, I panicked. Could I afford not just financially but emotionally to put the house back on the market, especially since the prime summer selling season was nearly over? The seller was very aware there were seasonal factors that would likely result in a better or worse outcome for the sale depending on timing of the market. When you sit down with your realtor to discuss options, you'll want to weigh the importance of the time on the market. They could give you advice on how you can get the best results in your individual situation. This should be an important consideration before deciding to sell as is or go the more traditional route. Finally, point number 5, a required seller disclosures and liability. Rather than strictly a disadvantage, this is also about correcting a common myth around as is sales. Before I mention that selling as is could reduce your liability, it might in some situations, but it may not release you if you don't do certain things. As is, you are still required to provide necessary property disclosures to a buyer the same way you would with a traditional real estate transaction. Your relationship as the seller with the property is largely going to be the factor that changes how those items are disclosed. If you know about a defect in the property condition, by law, this has to be disclosed to a buyer, regardless of whether or not the property is sold as is. This can differ from state to state, so consult your local realtor or attorney to help you work through required disclosures, forms, reports, and your obligations. Now that you are well informed on advantages versus disadvantages, if you decide you still want to sell as is, How do you price your home? Price is part of your marketing. It's an invitation to the party. The more people that you invite, the better your results will be. You want to get the highest net sale price. Finding the balance and hitting that sweet spot requires some work. Pricing is a moving target. It's not an exact science. And throwing repair costs and adjustments into that mix makes it a bit more challenging. Here are some tips on how to dial that price in so you're inviting the right buyers at the right time and optimizing that net sale price, because as I mentioned earlier, timing matters. So step one, get an estimation of your home value. Please don't use those online estimations. These are very inaccurate and can cause a lot more headaches than you know. It seems like for the last 10 of the last 20 years that I've been doing real estate, I've spent more time than I'd like to admit correcting these online estimations. Even seasoned real estate experts and professional home appraisers have to do deeper analysis on most properties to be anywhere near accurate. The initial asking price can make a massive difference in what you end up putting in your pocket when it's all said and done. I could do an hour-long video on pricing strategy alone, but that's not why you are here. The online estimates may give you some insight on an overall generalized trend in your immediate market, but they are extremely poor at providing accurate numbers individually. Your local real estate agent is your best friend in getting you that realistic expectation of the home price when the purpose is for resale, and definitely in terms of an as-is property. They will provide you with a comparative market analysis. This will consider any updates, repairs needed, and make the appropriate adjustments on pricing for the market at that time. A good realtor can also give you some direction on things you can do to optimize for better results. Now that you are a pro at understanding the ins and the outs of an as-is, this should put you in a great position to make a decision that makes sense for you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And if you are looking for an excellent local real estate professional to help you with your specific questions or situation, I work with a ton of real estate professionals across the country. All my contact info is in the description below. Reach out to me and I will contact you with someone in your area who can help you out. If you felt this information was helpful, you'll love this next video. See you next time.